The life of a coho salmon begins and ends in fresh water. They are born here, and after spending most of their adult lives in the saltwater ocean, they return to freshwater rivers and streams to spawn before they die. Once plentiful throughout the Russian River watershed, the coho salmon are now endangered. Conservation efforts have helped save the Russian River coho from extinction, but the fish are now facing yet another threat. In August, the wildfire burned around streams that are a crucial part of their habitat. I'm talking to Don McInhill, Executive Director of conservation nonprofit, Russian River Keeper.
Those streams are where we get our water. Saving that salmon ultimately is about making sure your grandkids can drink clean water.
Nonprofits like Russian River Keeper, along with federal, state, and local agencies, are assessing the fire damage.
Some of these areas have not burned in 100 years since they were logged of first growth redwoods and have grown back in a way that makes them very fire prone with multiple levels of vegetation that can bring the fire up into trees, along with those steep ridges just wicking fire up a hill where it can grow very rapidly and burn intensively, especially with winds.
With the fire nearly contained, the preliminary work is beginning.
We have to prepare for potentially, depending on the severity of the burn, whether it was lightly burned or intensely burned, that can unleash between 6 and up to 20 years of erosion. Forests are like sponges. When we subject them to forest fire, we turn them into almost like parking lots. And the water hits the land and doesn't just run off fast instead of soaking in. It washes the soil off the forest floor into the streams. There will be essentially a triage where we look at the worst hazards, and that's where we start to prioritize resources.
Fisheries scientist Nick Bauer and his colleagues at California Sea Grant's Russian River Salmon and Steelhead Monitoring Program are in the early stages of assessing the impact of the fires on the fish populations.
It looks like 20% approximately of the area where we observed fish was in the wildfire burn area. But we don't know how well the fish survived those areas yet. We have had crews in some of the areas hike through to evaluate it, and we did observe live fish. So we know that at least some fish have survived this. So it's not like everything died in these reaches. Some fish are still alive.
Getting through the winter rains will be the next challenge.
We're worried that landslides could input a lot of soil and sediment into the creeks. And when that happens, it can degrade fish habitat by filling in the deep pools that fish need to survive the summer, as well as filling in the spaces between the gravel that the fish need to spawn in the winter.
The wildfire occurred at the end of a particularly hot and dry summer that had already proved detrimental to the fish. Climate change has not only led to more extreme heat and fires, but it has also affected rain patterns.
In recent years, and with climate change, the rainfall has been more intense. So we have these events where all the rainfall comes in a short period of time instead of being spread out over a longer period of time. And that's bad because when the rain all comes at once, it causes flooding, which can also cause like hill slopes to collapse and makes landslides more likely and can wash fish out of the creeks. It can mobilize gravel where the fish have laid their eggs and wash the eggs out.
The coho salmon plays an important role in the ecosystem. There are many other plant and animal species that are dependent on the coho salmon for their own survival.
There's been over 125 different species observed eating salmon, including animals that we normally think of as being herbivorous, like deer and squirrels. And when the salmon come up into these creeks and they eat the salmon, they bring those salmon nutrients from the ocean up into the hillsides. And so basically, salmon are in turn fertilizing whole forest ecosystems. These forests evolved alongside with the salmon to be fertilized by them. So with them gone, that really decreases the health of the forest and decreases the health of all the animals that rely on these fish as well.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, in collaboration with California Department of Fish and Wildlife and water agency Sonoma Water, run a hatchery program for coho salmon and steelhead trout. Greg Horton is a principal environmental specialist at Sonoma Water.
Beginning in the early 2000s, we started a hatchery program at Warm Springs Hatchery. And that program has largely been responsible for saving the coho, probably from extinction. Back in the early 2000s, we were down to really a small handful of adult coho returning to the Russian River to spawn. And now we're up to, a few hundred fish returning to spawn and maybe a dozen or so streams.
Some of these key streams for coho recovery, such as Mill Creek, Gray Creek, and Gilliam Creek, were in the footprint of the Wall Ridge fire. The fire will likely change the fish hatchery's release plan this year, just as it did in 2017, when the Tubbs fire affected Mark West Creek.
What we elected to do in 2017 after the Tubbs fire was to not stock Mark West Creek, not release fish into Mark West Creek.
I visited the Mark West Creek area with Karen Gaffney about a year after the Tubbs fire. Karen is the Conservation Planning Manager at the Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District. She says that conservation of riparian corridors, the areas in and around streams and rivers, has many benefits, including fire mitigation.
The work that we did in collaboration with NASA after the 2017 complex fires demonstrated pretty conclusively that riparian corridors throughout the entire fire footprint acted as a buffer for the fires. So those areas did not burn in the same way that the surrounding landscape burns.
Conserving riparian corridors not only will help fish species like the coho salmon survive, but it can also help lessen the impact of drought, floods, and erosion while protecting our water supply.
It's really important that the riparian corridor and the streams stay intact and act as a buffer for sediment flows that may come down the hills after a fire, especially if it's a fire of very severe intensity, as we did experience in 2017 and since then.
Climate change is causing more extreme weather events around the world, leading to the catastrophic fires Northern California has experienced in recent years. Reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is fundamental in the fight against climate change. Prescribed fire could be a tool to mitigate fire risk.
We're learning slowly from the incredible wisdom of tribes who have used fire as a cultural and a stewardship tool for millennia, and used it as a mechanism to manage the landscape so that it wasn't subject to the kind of catastrophic fires that we are experiencing as a result both of climate change and also the way that we've managed our forests, and of disease and many other factors.
We've caused and contributed to a lot of the challenges faced by plants and animals like the coho salmon. But we can also come together to help protect these species.
Extinction is forever, and we only understand a small part of what it would mean, and there's really no going back from extinction. And these fish really are very much on the brink, and that's why I think there's so many great people doing fantastic work to try to turn that around.